Well, hello everybody. This is Louise Eddington with Cosmic Owl Astrology. I am the Cosmic Owl. And if you would subscribe to my channel while you're here and give the video a like, and maybe even hit the little bell to get notified when I upload new videos, I would really, really appreciate that. Today I'm going to talk about the week ahead. We're on Monday, July the 13th, and we have quite the week. So I'm going to share my chart and I'm going to read you a story first, and then I'm going to talk about it in astrology. So I'm going to talk about the myth of the Hydra and Hercules, and I do have to, or Heracles, and I do have to say that I thank Soul of Polaris Astrology for alerting me to this story and reminding me of it as we move into it. So this was the second labour of Heracles. He had 12 labours. I'm not going to go into that whole story. You can read all about these myths, but I don't want to be here all day. But I am going to read a little bit about the development of the myth. The oldest extant Hydra narrative appears in Hesiod's Theogony, while the oldest images of the monster are found on a pair of bronze fibulae dating to 700 BC. In both these sources, the main motifs of the Hydra myth are already present: a multi-headed serpent that is slain by Heracles and Aeolus. While these fibulae portray a six-headed Hydra, its number of heads was first fixed in writing by Alcaeus, who gave it 9 heads. Simonides, writing a century later, increased the number to 50, while Euripides, Virgil, and others did not give an exact figure. So that blah, blah, blah. Like the initial number of heads, the monster's capacity to regenerate lost heads varies with time and author. So that's just some history about that. Again, I'm not going to read it all. The Hydra has had many parallels in ancient Near Eastern religions. In particular, Sumerian, Babylonian, and Assyrian mythology celebrated the deeds of the war and hunting god Ninurta, whom the Angim credited with slaying 11 monsters on an expedition to the mountains, including a 7-headed serpent, possibly identical with the Mushmahu and Bashmu, whose constellation, despite having a single head, was later associated by the Greeks with the Hydra. The constellation is sometimes associated in Babylonian contexts with Marduk's dragon, the Mushhushushu. I don't know if I'm saying that right. But to Hercules. So he did the story is the 12 labors of Hercules, and this was the second labor, and this is the one we're going to talk about today. But I wanted to give you a bit of background to show that these myths are timeless. They go through various cultures and throughout history. So Eurystheus sent Hercules or Heracles to slay the Hydra, which Hera had raised just to slay Heracles. Upon reaching the swamp near Lake Lerna where the Hydra dwelt, Heracles covered his mouth and nose with a cloth to protect himself from the poisonous fumes. He shot flaming arrows into the Hydra's lair, the spring of Amymone. Amymone. I can't speak today. A deep cave from which it emerged only to terrorize neighboring villages. He then confronted the Hydra, wielding either a harvesting sickle or a sword or his famed club, depending on the telling. The chthonic creature's reaction to the decapitation was botanical. Two grew back, an expression of the hopelessness of such a struggle for any but the hero. The weakness of the Hydra was that it was invulnerable only if it retained at least one head. The details of the struggle are explicit in the Bibliotheca. Realizing that he could not defeat Hydra in this way, Heracles called on his nephew Aeolus for help. His nephew came upon the idea, possibly inspired by Pallas Athena. So remember, we've got Hera and Pallas Athena of using a firebrand to scorch their neck stumps after each decapitation. Heracles cut off each head and Iolaus cauterized the open stumps. Seeing that Heracles was winning the struggle, Hera sent a giant crab to distract him. He crushed it under his mighty foot. The Hydras, and by the way, that became the constellation Cancer. So the Hydra's one immortal head was cut off with a golden sword given to Heracles by Athena. Heracles placed the head still alive and writhing under a great rock on the sacred way between Lerna and Elaeus, and dipped his arrows in the Hydra's poisonous blood. Thus his second task was complete. The alternate version of this myth is that after cutting off one head, he then dipped his sword in its neck and used its venom to burn each head so it could not grow back. Hera, upset that Heracles had slain the beast she raised to kill him, placed it in the dark blue vault of the sky as the constellation Hydra. She then turned the crab into the constellation Cancer. So it goes on and on. You can go and look up if you want. And I want to find more information and read more about it myself, actually. But the sun, when the sun is in the sign of Cancer, the constellation Hydra has its head nearby. In fact, both constellations derived from the earlier Babylonian sign Bashmu and Alatu, the venomous snake and the crayfish. So we have this myth coming together at the moment. And I do want to say that Hera was also known as Juno. All right, in other myths. And Juno is still here, not quite on her own on the side of the on this side of the nodes anymore, but for a while she was completely holding the whole chart in Libra. And Juno or Hera in astrology represents the rights of the oppressed and the downtrodden. And boy, is that coming up right now in all kinds of ways that I'm not going to go into. But Native Americans, Black Lives Matter, a new Me Too kind of movement in various things, which I'm not going to talk about in detail because part of that's too personal. And all this is happening, really, is coming together this week because the sun is in the sign of Cancer. And remember, if you said that the constellation Hydra has its head nearby, and here we have Pluto, Lord of the Underworld over here, kind of their gatekeep, Pallas Athena, who supported Heracles, and we have Hera and Heracles. It's kind of like, it's all these polarities coming together in a big kind of war. Kind of black, white, men, women, all that kind of stuff. With all this stuff going on in Capricorn, which really represents the patriarchal institutions that are supported by all of us, basically, by giving our authority away and continuing to support these kind of things. Also today we have Mars, which is sharp swords. Remember, the Hydra was killed by this very sharp sword by Heracles, conjunct Chiron, the wounded healer. And you're beginning to get a kind of... so Chiron was wounded in the ankle by a poison arrow. There's that poison again. And so there's a lot of poison in the air right now. Okay, this week's going to be pretty gnarly, so I would stay out of it. And gaping wounds are going to be cut open, but also cauterized. I posted in my thing this morning about cauterizing the wounds. And what does cauterizing do? It helps them to heal and not to fester and not to burn. We have a chance and an opportunity here to cauterize some very deep old wounds. Okay. And, I'm looking at my part in that. I'm not going to go into detail, but I'm taking a step back to really go, okay, what's really all going on here? Because there's a lot of hurt all round in the world, excuse me. So the Mars, I think, and this is opposing Hera, Juno. Okay. And she's in the sign of Libra, which is Venus ruled, but also the sign of justice, the scales of justice forming. I'm not quite clear why Hera wanted to kill Heracles, to be quite honest. So I have some more studying to do with that. But I do believe this myth is really key to a lot of this astrology coming together. And it's to do with gender dynamics and the shadows within ourself, which is kind of the Hydra, because we all have these wounds caused by the patriarchy, these wounds caused by gender dynamics, these wounds caused by colonialism, these wounds caused by the horrible of humanity and how we can be so really cruel to each other. And this is opposing Juno, this conjunction. It's in square to Hygeia. I do think we're going to have a big spike in coronavirus this week, by the way. But that's almost an aside. It's kind of the coronavirus is making us kind of step back and in to face all these wounds. Some people are refusing to, but that's the way of the human condition. Some people don't want to look at these things. Okay. It's also in wide square to Mercury, which stationed direct yesterday. And Mercury is the messenger of the gods between the worlds. So he's the communicator. So is he going to kind of bring us together to finally, oh, what a mess we're in right now. But it's a time for introspection and awareness is basically what I'm saying, and not buy into any of these polarities. So I'm going to read from Astro Butterfly here. Chiron is known as the wounded healer and is associated with the process of healing by exposing one's deepest wound. However, to get there, we have to go through a painful process of reconciliation. Chiron is not all nice and sweet. Chiron can be the wounded wounder as much as he is the wounded healer. Chiron, the half-man, half-horse centaur, is a symbol of the duality we need to recognize within ourselves, our animalistic side and our higher, hopefully, human side. The more we try to distance ourselves from that 50% we find undesirable, the more split we become at an identity level. Going deep within ourselves and admitting there's 50% of us that is selfish and cruel is not easy. It's always difficult. If it doesn't hurt, we don't feel, and if we don't feel comfortable, it doesn't happen. At first, it's almost impossible because it goes against our survival instinct. That's why it's easier as a first step to healing to project the 50% onto the other. And I've done this too. The projection, it's somebody else's fault. That person hurt me, blah, blah, blah. The only answer, the only thing we can control is ourselves. And this is all coming in Aries, the sign that is the I am. And it's also our kind of more divine masculine energy, but this is not to speak of men and women. This is to speak of, in my book, The Complete Guide to Astrology, which I have no idea where it is right now. is I speak of using the terms day and night, and the day is the outgoing, extrovert, action kind of energy. And then we're being asked to integrate it with this night energy of receptivity, of deep, deep feelings, of the shadow, doing our real shadow work, and really a lot of self-examination. And I'm doing this video, but I personally I'm going to spend a lot of time this week in a lot of self-examination. And I know because of the situation out there in the world, in the astrology world, a lot of people are like, you're not taking a stand. Well, it's because I'm looking at my place in it. And I think instead of shouting on social media, I think this is where I've got to be at first. And I hope you all will. So that's the Chiron Mars. That's very ouchy. To quote, the Astro Butterfly, this is cutting into it and really not doing the splitting and projecting, and it's not so, and to quote them, it's not so good, Chiron in Aries, at I am, at taking charge, at claiming its identity as 50% wounded healer and 50% wounded wounder. I'm trying to take responsibility for that this week, and I hope you will too, because Mars is saying it's cutting into that. Okay. I just want to finish with Astro Butterfly before I move on to other things, to say Mars conjunct Chiron is our opportunity to see where we are spin doctors, where we deform reality to seek personal gain. When we do that, two beautiful things happen. We understand when others do the same, and we are much less likely to be the victim of other wounded wounders. And we find empathy for ourselves and others, and we heal. Ultimately, Mars conjunct Chiron is an opportunity to align our personal will, Mars, with the greater will, Chiron. And since none of us really knows what this greater will is, the best we can do is to aim to heal our inner Mars by embracing our selfishness and taking full responsibility for our actions. This is not easy, people. And I'm going to sit with it myself. And like I said, I'm going to stay out of it because I'm doing self-examination. And I'm not saying I'm perfect, but at least I've become aware that this is what I need to do. And I'm hoping you will too. Your whole part in all the polarity that we have. And so that's kind of connected with the wound and the poison, I think, in the Hydra story, and the fact that Hera was hurt. And here she is she was clearly hurt with Hercules, or she would not want to kill him. So wounded people wound, as we just looked at. And even though she stood up for women and children and the oppressed and the abused, she herself was wounded by her marriage to Zeus, who is Jupiter. And here we come to the other part of the story. Here we have Pluto digging up the dirt about the patriarchy in all its representations, the politics of control and dominion, men who've done it to women, but also women who've done it to each other or to men. It's all kind of coming up to festering to the surface as it's retrograde there. And the sun opposing it opposes Pallas, who she's kind of the best one in this player right now. But she's in opposition to all of this. Earlier today, she was in opposition to Pallas Athena. Now she's going to oppose Jupiter, husband of Juno, who was a bit of a beast, really. He was a philanderer, and is in astrology is seen as a benefic, but he's over the top, too much of everything. And this is in the patriarchy sign, Capricorn. And then Pluto, who's digging deep and excavating all the shit. And then the sun is going to go on and oppose Saturn in Capricorn. And that's where we're being asked to become the wise ones here. We're being asked to step into the wisdom of Capricorn rather than the shadow of Capricorn, which is all about fear and control and dominion. Okay. Capricorn's an amazing sign when we step into its wisdom, but it gets kind of a bad rap. And we're being given time this week to process all of this. Then this is all in square to Aries, who is stationing on July the 20th. And remember, she was an outcast as well. She was thought to be ugly and mean and nasty. And she was vengeful because she was hurt. Another one that's so hurt. There's so much wounding going on this week in this story. All our wounds are coming to the surface. And she's in Aries too, that sign of I am. Okay, and not to mention Lilith there as well, but she's our shame. So our identity is as who we are, as this real humanness is just being challenged this week, and all the dirt's being brought to the surface. And it's all involved in a lot of things. There's Ghislaine Maxwell. She's being charged, and this stuff probably going to come out there. I don't know when that will come out. And isn't that book about 45, our president, being released tomorrow, the one by his niece? There's so much going on at the moment and so much crap coming to the surface. We're not going to like what's coming out this week as the sun shines a light on it. And remember, that sun is in Cancer. That crab, Hercules, squashed. Again, you could say Hercules was Jupiter in a way. No, really. Anyway, it's all coming together. It's all really gnarly. It's going to be a difficult week to go through days. This morning we had Pallas Athena, who, at least, she's the owl, is at least giving us that straight, if you know a thing about, for saying my owl is my thing, and Pallas Athena is my thing, because I've even got her tattoo here. I didn't know that owls' eyes do not move like ours do. We can do that. Owls can't. Owls can only look straight ahead. They've got this piercing vision that just goes pew, and they have to turn their whole head to look at things. So we're going to be asked to turn our head a lot this week, and rather than just looking on the side eye, and really look things straight on. Okay. So that was earlier today. Then tomorrow, or early tomorrow, all kind of blending into each other, the sun will oppose Jupiter. Then Pluto on Wednesday, and then square to Eris, which again is stationing on the 20th. So she's at her station point on the 16th. And meanwhile, Lilith will move back to Chiron and activate that wound again, the 50% wounded wounder and the 50% wounded healer, and which is what we are. We're half beast, we're half a human. We've got this really nasty, icky side. We're all half and half of everything: shadow, nastiness, ick, and good side. I don't think anybody is all upper. And when we recognize that, anyway, and I take all my responsibility for any part I've had in this, the displays of polarity that are out there. I've done it too. I've been reactive, which is very Aries, because I have my South Node in Aries, which happened to be squared by the June the 21st eclipse. So I'm doing my South Node right now. Oh boy. And then we finish with the new moon on the 20th, which will oppose Saturn And really, you know, the sun and the moon is also, you could say, the two halves of us. The light, the dark, the night, the day, coming together, opposing Saturn in Capricorn, which is retrograde, on this new moon, which is kind of ending the eclipse season officially, really, in square to Aries, with all this going on over here and opposing this. If you see Mars is still tracking Juno for a few days, kind of cutting into all this stuff. We've got these major polarities. It's going to be a horrible week, I think, in terms of what comes to the surface. And there's going to be an awful lot of polarity out there and fighting and discord. If you can really lean into this about your part in it and what you are here to learn, and if you can help to start to do your own shadow work and look at your ick and look at your animalistic wounded side, because we're all wounded, you know, then maybe we can come to some healing. The more that you do it, the better. I could go on and on. There's so much tied in, but really we're cutting the heads off and cauterizing the wounds in the hope of bringing some healing. So have an awesome week. Do your inner work. Stay out of the fray. Don't get into this polarized crap that's out there right now. Much love. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you think.